Hey, it's Billy Bross with the Simple Marketing for Smart People podcast, where we're interviewing people who have an area of expertise. These are smart people who have built a business around that area of expertise. And now they're running into the fact that, oh my gosh, I've got to do marketing. So I'm joined today by David Perell. David, awesome to have you. And what is your area of expertise?
Mine is in writing and communication. So, what I'm really excited about is taking people who have a story to tell or an idea to share. They have a lot of domain expertise and helping them get that onto the page and communicate their idea so that they can attract the right people into their lives. So, sometimes that's friends, sometimes that is mentors, and sometimes that's people who could start a business with them or people who they could work for.
Yeah, well, I love that. And I love your story. We've worked together. We started working together when you launched your online course, Rite of Passage. And so I want to talk about that because you've had such an interesting journey. And I want to hear how you got into doing that, how you got into launching this online business, and then we'll get into some of the challenges that you faced along the way in growing not just that product, but the other things that you've built as well.
Yeah, I was not a natural born writer at all. I always enjoyed communication, but writing did not come easily to me. When I was in middle school, I had to go to reading comprehension tutoring because just words were tough for me. In high school, I skipped all the books. I got horrible grades. I remember I got a C plus in my advanced composition class. College was no better. I struggled with writing. It was always a challenge. And then I got to my first job out of college, and I remember being called into my boss's office, and I'm 22 years old at the time. I'm as green as they get. And I walk into this guy's office. He's 6'4", big beard, deep voice, and intimidating guy. And he basically says, your writing is really holding you back. And at the time, I was writing pitch decks for companies that we were trying to get to work with us. It was an advertising agency. He's like, man, your writing is weak.
Hmm.
And I ended up getting let go from the company 4 to 6 weeks later. And it was brutal. And, it might have been the story that I told myself, but I said, hey, not writing well was a big reason that I got laid off. And I was just in a really dark pit of despair. You're 7 months out of school, you don't have a job, you just got fired, laid off from the job that you were at. And I said, all right, what am I going to do? And what I started really doubling down on was this idea of writing on the internet, sharing your ideas in public, trying to be prolific, build an audience. And I noticed that even doing it at a fairly beginner level led to all sorts of new friendships, led to a bunch of opportunities. And I was like, wow, it was sort of like the Wizard of Oz. You walk through the door and all of a sudden it becomes just filled with color. I stepped into Narnia and I was like, oh my goodness, everyone needs to know about this. It was life changing. It was truly life changing. And I realized that good pieces were the ones that spread, and I needed to teach myself how to write. The challenge was I didn't know how to write. I didn't know how to do it at all. No one had taught me how to distribute ideas, but I knew that there was a real power in doing it. And I taught myself, and I said that I'm going to throw away all the traditional things that you learn about writing in school, and I'm going to figure out what works for me. And through that, I overcame writer's block. Through that, I figured out how to communicate an idea simply. Through that, I learned how to actually distribute a message once you have it, build an audience. And after I'd been doing that for a few years, my life had changed, and people said, hey, what you have going for yourself, I want to learn how to do that. And Rite of Passage was born out of that.
Interesting. And so this brings us to the point then where you need to do marketing
hmm
because I mean you were doing it to an extent before, but now you have this product to sell. You created this course, you need to get it into people's hands. Tell me, did you have any experience with sales or marketing before this in your life?
Not really.
Yeah. And that's most readers of the book, and that's myself as well, that we were not natural born salesmen, and this is a new thing for most of us. So what was that like, that first encounter with that commercial aspect of what you were doing, where you had to sell the course? What was going through your mind? What were you feeling?
Yeah, one thing that's funny is I worked for that advertising agency and I was selling for them, but that didn't feel like an issue selling for somebody else. I think that what was tricky was selling something that I had built and really standing confidently on that. I think that was the big change that I needed to make. And I think it's really easy when you read about marketing to get into tactics and different things like countdown timers and like, hey, how do we frame the copy? But you know what is really at the core of all this is things around worth and identity and value. You know, one of the things that you realize when you build a business is you actually come to terms with the idea that like you can just create value. And there can be an idea in your head and you just make something and then all of a sudden you make something and say it costs you $1,000 to deliver. Now you're selling it for $4,000 to deliver. And at times you could be like, why is anyone going to pay for this? Like I sort of feel like a fraud and I don't actually feel sturdy in my shoes. You know, it's like a batter getting into the dirt before they go to bat. You know, you got to dig your feet in and all that, kind of dust the dirt so you have a good grip. And I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done there in the marketing process. And when you start a company and other people are willing to pay for a creation that you've made, and for me it was just like sitting in this exact chair delivering ideas in the exact way I'm doing it right now. And 6 months ago my friends didn't want to hear what I had to say when we were at the bar, you know, drinking a Blue Moon or something. And now here I am delivering this and sending emails and trying to get people to fork over thousands of dollars to buy the course. And that identity shift, there was something profound that happened there that I even still feel like I'm going through. I don't know what it is, but for me, it's been a challenge over many years to get there.
And do you think that the nature of the product that you sell has something to do with that too? Because it is so much, well, you're so tied to it. I mean, for example, if you were reselling, I don't know, fountain pens that you bought wholesale and you started an
Oh man,
e-com,
I should just pivot the business. Honestly, I could
well, you
sell
are a fountain
fountain
pen guy,
pens.
aren't you?
Oh man, you'll be able to write like Thomas Jefferson. Oh, you'll have your John Hancock signature.
Oh,
I
yeah.
do that no problem.
Well, there might be an e-commerce store you need to launch on this time. But say you were to do that, do you think there's a distinction there? Because I would still be selling your own product, but I feel like the type of product you sell, that I sell, that a lot of us, these readers of the book and listeners to this podcast sell, it's different than something like that, isn't it?
I agree with that. I agree with that. And I think that there's something fundamentally different about selling your own ideas and backing them up. But you know what's really helped me? Just being real and authentic with people around sales. I heard a great story yesterday, and a friend was talking to a big name guy. Like he ran up. It was a big name musician.
Mhm.
Ran up to him and he goes, "Hey, you don't say it's Neil Young, right? That isn't who it was. Hey, Neil Young, you know, good to meet you, big fan." And then he goes, "Hey, can I sell you something?" And Neil Young was so taken aback by the audacity of somebody just telling you exactly what they were going to do. And then, "Hey, can I tell you something?" And then you just say it to them. Like, I think that what hurts people is hiding that they're trying to sell something or going beyond their skis or something like that. What I can do is I can sell Rite of Passage and say, "Hey, I figured this out. It works really well for me. I've spent the better part of a decade now just trying to figure out how do you write, building together a program that is the one I wish I would have had with the people that I didn't have when I got started, line by line editing, which I didn't have for like 7 or 8 years, a coach that you can work with. So you can sign up and you can enroll. And on the day that the course begins, you'll have everything that I've built after 10 years. And you could do it with us. Like, honestly, you can do it for free. You can do it for free on your own. I did it for free on my own, but it took me 10 years. You can do it in 5 weeks. And you'll have what I built in 10 years the second that the course starts. And that's how I think about the pitch, which is rather than trying to like overcome it by being impressive, almost do the opposite and just say, this is where I'm at, meet people where they're thinking. And there's something about that that creates a relatability and connection. And that is the kind of selling that works for me. It's just more real rather than trying to overcome it by doing something that's going to give me some kind of imposter syndrome.
I love that. And I love that anecdote too. There's something so refreshing about that brutal honesty of just saying, "Hey, can I sell you something?" Of asking, "Hey, can I sell you something?" It reminds me of that quote. I don't know who said it, but I fear more of, what is it? No, I prefer the devil I do to the devil I don't.
Hmm.
And when people are just, because a lot of people are very selling averse, and but they need to sell something, but they avoid it and they hedge and they kind of dance around it. And you see this, I see this a lot with creating free content too. And people will create a lot of free content because that's what you're supposed to do. And then when it comes time to sell, it's like, oh, well, this person has something to sell. And so it's like the thing that they feared actually comes back and it turns out to be true. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And if you
Yeah.
just get it out there, it kind of clears the air right away. You don't have to worry about it.
One of the things that I like to do is I like to flip things where I like to ask, how do I like to be sold? And I collect examples of those. And then what I do, if I ever feel nervous around selling or I get a little bit anxious, I look at those and I say, well, I collected these, and these were examples of somebody selling me that actually made me feel good and helped me admire that person. But my favorite example has nothing to do with the internet. I really like Persian rugs. I think it just runs in my family. All the men, we just love that Persian rug style. And I find a lot of the rugs to just be bland, and I really like designing spaces that are sort of filled with life and color. And a rug is a really easy way to do that. So what I did was I searched around Austin for the best rug store that I could find, and I ended up finding this store. And they're like, oh yeah, these are the people who fix the rug for like the governor of Texas. And I was like, great, I'll go to that person. So I walk in, and the the owner of the store sort of stands up. He sort of shakes my hand, introduces himself, and he says, "Hey, what are you looking for?" And I said, "I'm not really sure. I know I want a rug." And he then sort of takes me over to the other side, begins to show me rugs. But here is the kicker. I learned so much about rugs. I didn't realize that there are Persian rugs. There's rugs that were made in Pakistan, India. Then there's a different style that then China begins to copy some of those other rugs. Now, depending on the elevation where the rugs were made, you have all these different characteristics. And I learned so much about Persian rugs. It was like a free class. And I looked at the guy, I said, "Hey, I'm not ready to buy something right now, but when I'm ready to buy a rug, I'll happily come back to you." And he said, "Cool, that sounds good. Here's my number. Call me anytime." He follows up a few days later. I say, "Hey, maybe." Follows up a few days later. And always really nice, sending a few photos. "Hey, I feel like you might like this," personalized. And then about 2 weeks later, ended up buying a few rugs from him, paid, gave him a couple $1,000s. And there's a few lessons from that story. The first thing is he taught me. I like to be sold in a way that I'm learning, so I try to do that for other people. The second thing is I was so happy to give him my money, meaning that I know in my heart of hearts that not all sales is icky. And then the other thing was the art of the follow up in a friendly way that didn't feel pushy. How do then we do that in our own business?
Mm, what a great story. And yeah, I didn't know that there was so much to Persian rugs. The elevation makes a difference.
I
I would have
guess
never guessed
so.
that.
I guess so.
That's
Crazy,
that's
right?
that's incredible. Yeah. Well, and it goes back to something that we say in the book over and over again, that marketing is really teaching. And one thing that you do with your marketing, with your content, is you teach people how to properly value your product.
Hmm.
And I see this all the time, especially in more our space with online courses, where someone will come out with a course and they'll just announce it and it'll just be right to the offer. And I don't know how to properly value that course because there's really no content that comes out beforehand that explains how the elevation affects the quality of the Persian rug or the difference in the rug fibers, right? And I think it's because people don't really see that that's what marketing is. It is education, and they normally think that it is the countdown timers and all the gimmicks and everything. And so I'm curious about that for you. Did you know this right away when you went to start to sell your online course? Now, this next question is more symbolic, but maybe it's literal too. But did you go to Google and type in how to sell something online? And if you did, what did you find out there?
Hmm. Well, I don't remember what I did at the beginning, but I can tell you I'm always learning. Like right now, I'm reading a book called Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller
Oh, yeah.
and learning how to tell the story of my brand. And I want to say that because there's no finish line here, but there are things that you do figure out. And one of our core principles at Rite of Passage is called making the flip. And what people do when they do marketing, when they sell anything, is they experience that thing from their perspective. And you have to do exactly the opposite. You have to meet people where they're at and then speak to the thought chain that they're thinking about. So what you do is you spend all day thinking about the product that you deliver, but they are thinking about the problem that they have. So I'll give you an example. You're in the middle of the Arabian desert. It's 115 degrees and you have a little Coca-Cola stand, okay? Somebody comes up, there's a couple, they're tired, they're sweating, they've been walking for the last 3 hours. You don't say, hey, let me tell you about Coca-Cola. We're based in Atlanta. We were founded in the late 19th century, early 20th century, all these sorts of things. That's not what you do. You say, man, you look thirsty. You look thirsty. You've been having a long day, and I have the most refreshing drink that you could possibly have. It's been cooled on ice, and once you drink this, you'll go, ah. And if you do that, they're going to resonate with that so much more. And that's what it means to make the flip, to really take the perspective that they're in right now and to be in their shoes instead of your own.
I love that example. Yeah. And it reminds me of in our 5 light bulbs framework, we have this saying that people get stuck in light bulb 4, which is the one that represents your offer. And so it's similar to that course launch example and to your, was it Coca-Cola is what's available in the desert here? Yeah, just talking about us, we've won these awards, we've been in business for 30 years versus leading with it would be light bulb 1, which is the empathy piece, that word that you began with, which is the word you. And that's so important.
Right. And it's important to know your customer because you talk about, hey, we've been in business for 30 years, all that jazz. Like, if you're selling to a business client, that stuff matters. Someone who's a manager, they're buying something for their team, they have to report based on some budget that they're constrained by. Well, they want to know who else took this course. What are the statistical results that come from this? Hey, what's the ROI going to be? What are the exact features? Because they have to have enough ammunition that if their boss gets mad at them, that they're going to be okay. So your pitch needs to change for whoever it is that you're talking about. And what it is, it's about knowing your customer, about just talking to them, getting to know what are the questions that they have, and then walking them through that sequence and knowing when to promote certain kinds of your product and when to promote other kinds. And if you do that well, then that's good marketing. Good marketing is just communication. It's just building trust and connection at scale. That is what marketing is, so that, because there's a so that marketing, so that people buy your product.
You speak with a lot of really smart, really well-educated, intelligent people. And I feel like the more educated you are, the more intelligent you are, the worse you are at that. And the more you tend to fall into this trap of focusing on your product over the person. Do you notice that? And if so, why do you think that is?
I think that that's sometimes true. I think it's true if you're feeling insecure. And I think it's not true if you are feeling secure with your product and you're not trying to posture or anything like that. I think often people who do spend a lot of time with smart people are insecure about their lack of intelligence and they want to seem smart. Whereas people who are very confident, they're just comfortable in their own shoes and they can just speak like a real human being. And I like to think of where do I need to be on the ladder of where this person is. Sometimes you need to speak to somebody like a child, and I don't mean that in a demeaning or condescending way, but I mean with that sort of simplicity. And sometimes it helps sometimes people need the specific word choice and the examples that elevate what you do to add some integrity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The confidence piece, you keep coming back to that. That seems like such a key part of marketing is having confidence in yourself and in your product.
Well, one thing that I think really helps, that I think hurts a lot of digital marketers, is that they don't actually get out into the world, into the flesh. One of the best
Mm.
things that you can do for your confidence is to get with a prospective customer in person at lunch. Your face is 4 feet away from the other person. You give your pitch and you watch their eyes open. And then you do it with person 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. By the time you hit person 20, you watch people's eyes open. You are going to be proud and confident of the thing that you deliver. But if you're stuck behind a digital screen, it's hard to get that confidence because you're inherently divorced from like the natural human experience that leads to confidence.
Man, can you imagine if everyone did that? If everyone actually followed this advice, which I hope they do. I mean, you would learn so much about yourself. You would learn so much about the other person. And then you would also have your pitch so honed because you can see their eyes light up. I like how you said that. And you would naturally fall into that groove of finding that right message to make those eyes light up. And then when you go to sit behind your computer, those words just flow right onto the page. And then everyone there is more likely to buy.
Bingo.
Yeah. But again, this isn't what most people think of when they think of marketing. In the book, we open a chapter with this where we say, I say, I go in front of these audiences and I ask, what is marketing? And I get all sorts of responses back. I'm curious what you think those responses would be. What do you think the average person, if you could rattle off a few, thinks marketing is?
One way would be like a series of tricks to game people into buying your product. Another could be sharing the message of your story at scale. Those two come to mind.
Yeah. Yeah. The tricks one, I hear that a lot. Tricks, deception, gimmicks, tools. There's a lot of software tools out there now, a lot of shiny objects. So, how do you think someone can reframe then how they think about marketing?
You got to make a swipe file of marketing that you love. And when you see a piece of marketing that you love, to not just look at it, but to deconstruct it, to deconstruct it. What is it about this marketing that you particularly appreciate? And same thing, when you see a piece of marketing or sales that you're repulsed by, what is it? For example, I can't stand the people from PETA and like the Nature Conservatory or like whatever it is who come up to you on the street and they're like, hey, do you have 30 seconds right now to stop you? And they like get in your way and then they like pester you to try to get you to talk to them. I can't stand that. I find that to be incredibly annoying and it doesn't work for me. Whereas if you were to take some of those same ideas and you were to put it in a really compelling 3-minute video or a really good essay that actually explains the exact same problem, but it's going to help me learn something, then for me, that marketing is going to be much more compelling. And here's the other thing. You don't need to get all 7 billion people on planet Earth to buy your product in order to have a successful business. One of the biggest problems that people run into when they run a company is that they don't focus enough on their target customer. Who am I going for? How do they want to be marketed to? And all that. We're not talking about running Apple here. We're talking about running your business so that you can make 7, 8 figures in profit per year. And if you do that, you don't need to reach everybody at all. So then you can really think about what is the kind of marketing that's tasteful and enjoyable for me to consume, and how do I create that experience for the people I want to buy my product.
I like that. Yeah. And I know what you mean about the people just interrupting you on the street. It reminds me of something Dan Kennedy says, that you want to be the welcomed guest, not the annoying pest.
Mm-hmm.
And you do that by creating this content, whether it's that video or written text, whatever fits you and what you're best at and what you enjoy doing, that can educate. Because at the end of the day, that's really what marketing is, education.
Yep. And also trust. Trust. It's getting easier and easier to get people's attention in the sense that you can now buy attention. And that has only been a product of the mass media over the last 100 years or so. You can just buy an ad and you can get people's attention. But what you can't buy is trust. Trust is, if you betrayed me, Billy, and you did something that really hurt me that I wasn't okay with, you could not give me $1 billion and have me trust you. There is no amount of money that you can pay to get somebody's trust. And trust and confidence leads to effective marketing outcomes. And I always think about that, which is one of the key variables that you can have is not just what will be delivered, but what are the chances that this company will deliver that outcome. So we'll go back to the Coca-Cola example. If the people in the Arabian desert walk up to the little table and they want a Coca-Cola, and I tell you that this is going to be a refreshing drink, that's good. But you know what's great? If you're looking at all these people who walk up and they look miserable, and you look at people who, after they drink the Coca-Cola, are laughing and smiling, and they're putting their hands in the air and tilting their necks back, and they just look so refreshed. Now you have a social proof that the product works for a bunch of people. And even though the product is the same, I'm now willing to pay more because the likelihood of success in my head has gone up.
Yeah. So that social proof builds trust.
Exactly. One way.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious. You've had, you are modest, but you've had good success. I come across a lot of people who want to sell things online, and the majority of people don't make a single dollar from it. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but this marketing thing is really tricky. And I know you're still learning, but you've had good success. And so tell me, what are a few of the key things that have really worked for you? Because there's so much marketing advice out there. Can you narrow it down to two or three things that you just say, okay, we did that, and in my experience, that worked. I will do that again.
I think that one of the best things that you can do is to deliver something to somebody for free, whether it's an idea or a concept that they implement and they succeed with, and then they're more likely to trust you. I think that's a huge help. And then the other thing, so now you have trust based on outcome. Another thing that you can have is trust based on time, where a lot of people who I meet, they say, I've been thinking of taking your rite of passage course for years. And they've been following me for a long time, coming across my ideas, maybe sharing some of my own ideas with other people. And through the consistency that can only come with time, they've developed a relationship with me that then says, I want to buy from you.
That longevity piece, that is so missing. Everyone wants the quick wins, they want the short-term gains. But I saw a stat recently, and this was more B2B, but I think it still applies, that the average sales cycle is 8 months in B2B. And I know people who have bought from me who have been on my list for years. So how big a part of it is that, just showing up and delivering consistent value over time?
Yeah. The higher the price point, the longer somebody needs to have a relationship with you before they buy something. So think of car commercials. Car commercials account for a huge proportion of total ad spend on television. And I probably watched Toyota commercials for almost 20 years before I bought my Toyota. 20 years. Whereas there's other products where I see a great launch video on Twitter and I'm like, oh, I'm going to sign up for the free trial. No problem. And those sorts of ones, they really focus on novelty, hard-hitting text, and they're more almost brash in how they communicate. They say, check out this really cool thing, and then it sort of goes viral. Or they'll say, you're going to be an idiot unless you sign up for this, or something like that. It's much more heavy-hitting, and the words tend to almost smack you in the face rather than being more artistic in the way that they deliver products or their marketing. And I also just think it's important to think through, what is my price point? What are some comps? Because there's no one way to do marketing. There's just one way to do marketing for you right now, for your customer base that you're going for in this moment. You know what I mean? But there are general principles that do work across all different kinds of marketing. And the word I always come back to is, how do you build trust with the right people? Build trust with the right people and have them think that you're the right person to deliver this outcome. It's so simple. It's so simple, and it's about doing that at scale. What marketing is fundamentally about is, rather than doing 100,000 sales calls, you do one marketing email, and you build an audience, and as your audience grows, the megaphone goes wider, and then you begin to have some success.
Yeah, and I love that example of the Toyota, the car, high-priced product versus the inexpensive SaaS software. In the book, I give this example of eggs, chicken eggs at the store that you would buy to eat, and the difference between fancy eggs, as I call them, so the organic eggs, the free range, whatever, and the commodity eggs. And when those fancy eggs first came out, you started to see more education associated with them to justify charging whatever it was, $6, $7 for a dozen versus the $1 for the commodity eggs. And even though it's kind of a silly example and there's not a huge difference there, it's a microcosm of this larger problem. And I think you hit on it too, where what I say in the book is you don't want to sell fancy eggs like they're commodity eggs.
Right.
And I see people who borrow those tactics, those brash in your face, like merchandising, I would call it tactics, like slash out the price and write a new one for something like a $4,000 online course. So I think the lesson here is to really know your product's nature and to know how to sell a product like that.
Right. And a good example of that is the Birkin bag. Hermes, $250 billion company, you cannot buy a $25,000 Birkin bag purse unless you're invited to. They just won't let you. They won't let you do it. Same with when I went to Berlin, walked up to the hottest nightclub in the city, they turned me right away. Do you know how badly I want to go to that nightclub? Now, I'm not saying that we should all be doing that, but it really depends on what is your product, how do you want to position, what are you going for? And you look at Berlin nightclubs and the Birkin bag, they're trying to repel people, and by doing that, create scarcity. And then we always think of scarcity coming from high demand, but sometimes scarcity can lead to high demand. I was reading about a restaurant yesterday in Barcelona, hot new restaurant, and what they did as their strategy is they made a line that always walks out the door, and there's no space inside to wait, so you have to wait outside. So then the place just looks like a really popular place. I know I once met the owner of an ice cream shop in New York who would just pay people to stand outside in the line every day for 30 minutes. Built up, hey, this place always has a line. Guess what? People want to go there. And sometimes marketing doesn't need to be a countdown clock. It doesn't need to be a sales slash. It just needs to be, hey, here's an ice cream store. Whenever I walk by, there's 25 people outside at 3:30 p.m. Hey, that place must be pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. It reminds me when I was big into the craft beer scene, and I would buy tickets to buy a beer. I would wait in line to buy the ticket, and then I would stand in line with the ticket and wait to get the beer. And you're right that element of scarcity, exclusivity, and I think, but also going back to something you said about honesty and trust. There's an implication when you do make something that rare and that exclusive that there was more time spent on it, that there was more care that went into it. So I think that's a key piece of it too, is that you could fake that sort of a thing and make it more of a gimmick. And then because when people get the product, it could be shoddy. So the product really has to back up the way that you sell it. I think you're a great example, right? Like you sell one of the most expensive online courses that I've seen, a few $1,000s. That's a lot for an online course. But I've been in your program, and the attention to detail that you have in there and the care that you put into it, I mean, it is like that bag. So I think that's a key part of it too. You have to back it up with the quality if you use strategies like that.
Thanks. I agree. I was just talking to a friend, and she just bought some Valentino shoes, and they totally broke. And now when you pitch that something's going to be a 10 and it delivers at a 3, now you've created the conditions for people to speak badly about your product. Whereas if you go to a Motel 6 and somebody complains to you and they're like, man, the room service just wasn't that good. The sheets weren't that soft. You're like, you went to a Motel 6. So the way that you position your product, if you overstate it, now you've made it so that people are going to want to say bad things about your company. And Brian Eno has this line where he says, gossip is philosophy. And I love that line, that every time we're gossiping, we're actually philosophizing about what is good, what is bad, the nature of good and evil, what is morality, how should we live together. And this is something that we don't like as humans, and for good reason. When people overstate their hand, they don't deliver. And fine, if you want to overhype your product, then go for it. But just know that you're going to be like Icarus. You're flying too close to the sun. Those wings will get burned. Once the wings get clipped, you're falling right to the ground, and that's a big old fall.
Yes, you have a responsibility when you use tactics like that, when you make an exclusive high-end product to back it up, and you put pressure on yourself. So yeah, you better bring the good stuff. All right, I want to wrap up with one final question. We talked about some of the things that you found to work. Anything, I know for me, there's been a lot of things, but anything jump into your mind that just didn't work that you tried marketing wise and you're like, that was a flop?
One thing that's surprising is that the tactics change over time. So when we were in COVID, links to workshops worked really well. And I could send out a tweet and get a few thousand people to join a marketing workshop. I can't do that anymore in the same way. So I need to change my
Hmm,
tactics. So there's things that worked in one year that don't work the next year. And I think that's pretty common.
that's interesting. So, due to these external factors, because COVID was a different time, certain tactics worked then and now they don't. So, the lesson I'm hearing is that you need to really have your ear to the ground and be able to be nimble and to adapt to what's happening in the outside world.
Yeah. And the Twitter algorithm changed.
Yeah, and so you're dependent on these platforms as well, and
Right.
so that is part of this is knowing where you distribute your message and then knowing what the rules are on those channels.
Yep.
Okay, awesome, man. Well, hey, I appreciate this. Yeah, it was fun talking marketing with you, and yeah, let us know where people can find you.
Best thing is I have a podcast of my own called How I Write, and I interview writers about their writing process, and then I'm pretty active on Twitter at David_Perell, so you can find me there.
All right, thanks so much, man.
Thanks, Billy.